are persuasive selling sentences? Well, I call PSS. Why are they so important? They're important because they require less work from you and you get more effort. You put in 10 units, maybe 10 words, and the output is 1,000 units. Now, isn't that better than putting in 10 units and getting out 0 output, or putting in 10 units and getting out 10 units of output? But if you go 10 and you get 1,000, how often will you put in those 10 units? And even if you get bored, you keep saying the same things again and again and again. Now, what are these things? Well, we're going to get to them. Now, how can persuasive selling sentences boost your sales and closing capability? Now, many people I know don't feel they're good at sales. But yet, when I ask them, are you married? And they say yes. I say, well, why aren't you good at sales? You made a sale there. And then they'll tell me, well, I'm a coach and I can't get these high-end clients like you teach. That's one of my specialties, is creating marketing funnels and processes so that coaches and consultants who don't feel they're salespeople, they don't feel that they're influencers or very persuasive, I teach them that they don't have to be. They can just apply these persuasive selling sentences, pepper them, sprinkle them into their language, memorize them, and then eventually they'll get the sale. Well, when they say, well, I tried 10 times last week, I didn't get one client. I go, no, you got 10 sales. The sale is always made, okay? In this case, the prospect sold you. You weren't successful. The prospect was a better salesperson than you were. Now, if you got the prospect to become a client, now you were a better salesperson. So the sale is always made. There's no rejection. Either you're selling them and they're selling you on their objections and roadblocks. Are you getting this? That's not semantics. That's the truth. I learned that from Jeffrey Gitomer in one of his books, one of the great authors on selling. He says the sale is always made. And I don't know the quote, so I'm not going to butcher it, but it's much like I just described. Now let's begin our how with 3 ways to use trial closes, which are persuasive selling sentences, to close more sales. Now, trial closes, that's a term I got from this book, which again is Ted Thomas, my good friend, who lives near Orlando, Florida. And these are statements and they're sentences. They're like Elmer Wheeler's sentences. Elmer Wheeler is my root mentor, and Ted Thomas is kind of he's the trunk to the tree, right? And guess what I get? I get the fruit because I utilize it, and you can do too. You can do too. If you allow me to be the branches and the leaves to your, tree of money, then you just use these again and again, and you don't have to be good at sales. You don't have to think about it. Just utilize them. Now, the first way to use them is through a virtual sales presentation. So when you use them in a virtual sales presentation, the key to a persuasive selling, for a persuasive selling sentence, right? PSS, the most important part of a PSS, persuasive selling sentence. Now that's my version of it. The most important is to do them in 3s, in triplicate. When you get those forms in triplicate, there's a white sheet and there's a yellow sheet and a pink sheet, right? When I'm on stage, there's always triplicate in the back. The top sheet goes to the new student or the client or the member, whatever you call them. The middle sheet will go to the event manager who invited me there, or my host, and then the bottom sheet goes to me. So in that same way, there's a power of 3 with PSS. The persuasive selling sentences, they work best in 3s. So you're not going to just do one and expect the world to unfold. What you're going to do is you're going to pepper them in your language, because it's like tapping a rock with a small hammer. And after 103 taps, or even better, 108 taps, all of a sudden by the 108th, the rock splits apart. Now, is that worth it? Of course it is, because then you don't have to put all the burden of closing and persuasion in that very often awkward moment at the very end to find out if they're buying. You already know they're buying because they've told you all along. Let's get some examples. All right, here we go. Can you see the possibilities of what I'm saying here? My friend, can you see the possibilities of what PSS can do for you? Well, that's a persuasive selling sentence. How about this one? Example number 2. If you allow me to push you today, I can show you how to put an end to uncertainty when it comes to selling and persuasion. Will you allow me to push you? Now, if I were on stage, I would say, raise your hand if I can push you to overcome that uncertainty about selling. But if I'm on a virtual stage, I can't do that because there is no raising your hand. It's silly and it takes time. There's this delay and it doesn't make any sense. So the virtual and the physical is different. And I'm the only one on the planet I know of that has separated the two with PSS. I do stand on the shoulders of 2 giants, Elmer Wheeler and Ted Thomas, but I'm standing up there like the Michelin Man, if you know what it looks like in the US, maybe a cape going back and saying, I'm going to persuade you and you don't even know it. All right, so during virtual presentations is a time to use it. During stage sales presentations, you know, when you're on stage, you're selling something. You're selling an idea. Even during a TED Talk, you're selling an action. Like go pick up some litter, go hug your child, go discover your verb. That's my TED Talk, right? Put your verb on your badge. And that's the topic for another day. But what's important is when you're on stage, now you can ask for consensus. You can ask them to raise their hands. Now, if you know all about suggestology, and if you know about experiential learning, then you know engagement is important on stage. Now, many times people will be taught to say, how many of you, and then they have people raise their hand. When I'm on stage with a cold audience, I don't ask the question, how many of you? I will say, raise your hand if, or can I see a show of hands if, or folks, put your hands up if, right? And then I ask the question. It's softer and it's more inviting, plus it's more directional. How many of you isn't saying raising your hand. But if I say, hey, raise your hand, and if I'm raising my hand, I'm giving a directive, it's a lot easier. If you're a stage presenter, try that. And then at the end, when you got rapport, start asking how many of you, because then you've earned the right. So on stage, I would say, okay, who else in this room sees this persuasive selling sentence thing as a solution to all their sales problems? Now, topic is the template. So who else in this room sees this as a solution to their fill in your topic problems? You see that? That's a template. And so when I ask that, then I'll say, who else besides me sees this as a solution to your problems? Now, is that a persuasive selling sentence? Yes. Is that a tested sentence that sells? It does. It's getting them closer to the sale. What you're doing is you're putting little breadcrumbs and they're eating it, and they're coming closer and closer to you. You're pulling them in, right? And what Ted would call that, Ted Thomas, he would call it a trial close, because it's not the close, but it's a trial close. There's a sequence. So by the time you get to the close, you don't require as much energy because they're closer to you. You don't have to cast out this line where they're like hundreds of yards or meters away. They're right next to you. So you can just pull them in and say, okay, you ready? So that's the point. And I hope that analogy works for you, even if you're reading this. And then here's another example. Raise your hand if you believe this could make your life easier. You see the benefit? Now, you could make your own. There are hundreds of these. Raise your hand if you think that persuasive selling sentences could make your life easier. Or I would say, put your hands up if PSS would make your life easier if I were on stage. And then if I'm not on stage, on the virtual stage, such as a Facebook Live, perhaps, I would say, imagine how much easier life will be if you just apply PSS in your family life or your business life, maybe family life with your spouse and kids, because you can do little trial closes and persuasive selling sentences to get them to bed, to eat their dinner, or to go on a date night with your spouse. Why not? You're always selling. The sale is always made. The person that you're talking to, either they're winning or you're winning. So if you want to win a heart, use persuasive selling sentences.